Hello, right, good afternoon. I think I can just about say good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this discussion theatre at TFMNA. My name's Joel Harrison. I'm Editorial and Content Director of B2B Marketing. It's a lovely title, isn't it? I apologise for that, it's a bit long-winded. What it means is I'm just in charge of content. I'm kind of a journalist, which is why they've asked me to be a facilitator here. What they didn't know is I don't really know anything about the subject area, which is content management. So I'm relying on these wonderful people we have here to be your guides and experts and enthusiasts for the subject matter for the next 30 minutes or so. It's going to be a very interactive session, so we really ask you to raise your hands if you have a question or a comment wherever you can, and we'll try and get to those things we can. We've got half an hour, so time's going to be limited. We've got a lot to cover. It's a bit whistle-stop, but don't be shy. If you've got a question or a comment, please do make sure you ask. So the title here we've got today for this next half an hour is Mobile Data and Analytics, Exploring the Transformation of Content Marketing Technology. It's a big title, isn't it? There's a lot to get through in that. And I think in terms of contextualization of that subject, from my perspective, as marketers, we understand that the understanding that the web is, of the importance of the web in terms of your marketing strategy is long since been accepted. It's absolutely critical to what you're doing. But I think what's changed more recently, at least in the B2B perspective, and I guess to an extent in the consumer side of things, is the importance of content. And the importance of content to driving your marketing, to create a degree of inbound marketing, which is to a greater or lesser extent is making marketers become more and more act as publishers. There's this concept of brand journalism, and so increasingly there is a growing pressure on the content management systems to actually enable that process. So hopefully what we're going to talk through today is about how these platforms are developing and some of the issues that that's creating, but also the opportunities that's creating. There is also an analytics side to this discussion as well, and we have Conrad from Web Trends to talk a bit about that. And I think as well as creating the content, there's a challenge in terms of understanding what that content means, understanding which content works best for your organisation, which content is delivering best in your objectives. So I think there is a very real interface between content and analytics, which we need to address, and hopefully the next half an hour will give you a bit more insight into that. So briefly, just to introduce our panel, working from left to right, we have on the far left-hand side we've got Peter Sunna, who is product marketing manager from Episerver. So Peter, if you just want to let everyone know who you are, that was great. Thank you very much indeed. Next to Peter, we have Anthony Hook, who is technical sales manager at Sitecore. Then all the way from the US of A, we've got Bob Canaway, who's VP of marketing for Ectron. And last but by no means least, Conrad Bennett, who's VP of Technical Service for Web Trends. So a very august panel. You're going to be blown away by their knowledge and in-depth of their insights. At least I hope you are, because you certainly won't be blown away by mine anyway. I thought we'd start. There's three broad areas we really wanted to cover with this session, which kind of relate to the issue of this integration of content and analytics. I think the first one was this notion of being mobile first. I mean, from a publisher's point of view, there's a challenge a few years back to say, okay, we're not print first, we're web first. But now I think obviously the mobile web is accelerated so fast in terms of its growth that there's a pressure for brands to become mobile first. But Peter, I know you had to send me some info on this. I mean, do you think, is this an aspiration or is it a real practicality? Can brands actually do this in the current environment? Can the technology actually facilitate it?
Yes, as I see it, traditionally we've been designing the web for the desktop experience, and then mobile, as you said, exploded, which meant that, okay, we need a mobile website as well, and it started off by, okay, we just cut off some specific features that we will have on our mobile website, and that will be enough for our mobile users. And then companies starting to understand that they didn't fulfill the needs for mobile. And then the mobile first revolution came, which is, okay, we should instead focus on mobile, which means that we select the most important features that we know that our customers will use, and that's what we designed for, and that's also what will be available on mobile, and then we can expand that and sort of deliver the experience for desktop as well. So I think the most important part here is that by going mobile first, we can actually make sure that the experience on mobile, which we know will be the most used device moving forward to access the web, and utilize the functionality of the mobile, which means that we can have the GPS, we can have other things such as near-field communications and things like that, and really take advantage of that on mobile. And then we expand to the desktop, etc. We can just cut those features off. But the important thing is that we really utilize the context when designing the experience, and that's something that the CMS should be able to take care of as well.
Okay, so it's a challenge, but it is possible. Anthony, is that something you relate to then in terms of?
I completely agree really with Peter. Mobile is going to be the biggest platform going forward, and we look at all the statistics, we look at how users are adopting, and we look at the way that users are interfacing with their mobile devices. They're doing things that we never thought people would do, only 3-4 years ago, such as taking photos of particular items of clothing inside a store, or browsing the mobile website whilst walking through Next, trying to understand which item they saw online those days before. So I couldn't agree more that mobile first is definitely an approach. I think the technology is now starting to allow us to make use of things like near-field communications, making sure we can use e-wallets and e-passports. So whilst I think it's an important strategy for the technology, it's also important for the UX and really understanding that we've got to create. I think that we all hear the moniker sort of rethink, not resize, and I think that's what's more appropriate to mobile first, is rethink the approach on mobile and then perhaps scale upwards rather than traditionally what we've been doing, building desktop and then going down.
I think I wanted to kind of give the other guys on the panel a chance to ask some questions as well, but it might be quite interesting to get a level of understanding of you guys out there in terms of your mobile strategy. I mean, can you put your hand up if you have a mobile strategy for your organisation? Okay, so that's not many people. Would anybody here describe themselves as mobile first? Right, so this is definitely a kind of aspirational piece. Bob, does that kind of tally with your understanding or expectations of people's?
I think the one thing that...
Bob, can you push the microphone towards you because there's so much ambient noise in here. I can't hear you. I don't know how much everyone else
can you hear me? Is this good? All right. So the thing that I think about with mobile first is, I mean, it's very obvious that the things that these gentlemen are saying are very true, right? Mobile's here. Right? Anybody think that it's not? If you do, then probably should get out of marketing right now. Mobile's here. Mobile is a way that your customers are going to interact with you, but it's only one way that they're going to interact with you. And so I've had a lot of conversations with Luke Wroblewski. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he wrote the book Mobile First, and it's definitely a great read. The way that I think about this is mobile first is important, but customer first is even more important, right? So you have to think about the interactions that your customers are going to have with you through your digital channels, right? And you have to build the right interaction for the right customer at the right time through the right digital channel. And so mobile is one aspect of that, but just starting with responsive web design, it's not going to be enough. You have to think about the actual experience that's going to happen there. So I kind of twist it a little bit, and Luke, if you're here, you're listening, I apologize, but I think of it as customer first. When we redesigned Ectron.com, this kind of cool thing about being a marketer and working in the CMS industry, we designed our site mobile, desktop, tablet, and other device first, right? So we built all of our templates across all of our different target platforms, and we thought about what types of images we're going to send down, right? So if you think about doing a picture of our booth, right? So maybe on our desktop site, the picture of our booth is great. It gives you a lot of information. You can see all the people getting coffee, free coffee, talking to our sales guys. But you go to the mobile phone, and that all gets compressed down, right? So you lose all of that information. So maybe we should show two people talking in front of our logo, right? So switch that image out. So responsive web design is okay. It's one way to get there. But being adaptive and thinking about the customer experience across all the channels is key.
I think that's the area I want to come on to, but it does, your point there about being customer first is really key, and it segues beautifully with asking Conrad to talk about actually understanding what it is that your customers need and what their behaviours are. So, I guess that's where analytics platforms can come in. I mean, do you, what kind of visibility can you get in terms of your audience's usage of mobile?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think one of the key things for us is that when you talk about mobile first, people have a very different view of what mobile actually means now. It's different devices, it's different platforms. You can't rely on consistent screen size, you can't rely on any particular factor about that. And Bob's point about being customer first was critical, really, because it's about experience and it's about the message that you're putting across. Part of one of the key features with what you should be able to do with your analytics is the ability to see what people are doing and when they're doing it, because there are differences in terms of lots of different factors: device, platform, also geography, time of day, types of content. So there are lots and lots of things that you can look at that will help you to decide what are the priorities and what are the ways in which we can do that. We've been working with organisations like the Telegraph. When they first launched their app, they were really unsure how people were going to use it, and only through analytics have they discovered how it gets used, when it gets used, what types of content people consume. Is it something that people are downloading content when they first get up and reading it on the train, something they do in the evening in front of the TV? So there are lots of different ways in which you can look at that data, and it definitely helps in terms of then putting together an approach and a strategy for how you achieve it.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Understanding where your customers are and what they're doing now is very powerful in terms of determining your future strategy. But I guess the problem at the moment is that it's all changing so fast, and that what behaviour is now won't be the same behaviour in 6 months' time. So if we've got people out here thinking, what do I do? How do I build my strategy? What should I be planning for? What advice can you? How do you guys suggest they plan for this? I mean, what time frame should they be looking at? How can they understand what they should be thinking about in the next 18 months or so? Any thoughts on that? Any of the panel? Yeah, Anthony, go for it.
Sure. I think it comes down to two types of analytics, really. One is really your sort of end-of-week marketing director's report that says we've had this amount of visitors, we've had this amount of conversions, we've had this amount of drop-offs on this particular channels in this particular way. The other really then comes down to instantly actionable analytics. And what I mean by that is if you're on a website and you're personalizing for a user, in the background you should be doing things like behavioral profiling based on what content that they view, personalizing the experience and using maybe real-time decision engine or pre-built rules that says, you know what, because the users come to a website looking for this particular keyword, they viewed this particular page which matches what they came for, or they might have changed direction, but just understanding through each iteration and each action what they're doing, building up a behavioral profile, and then having the technology that can react to that particular profile, react to that particular action that they have completed. And I think what we find a lot of the time in my world is that those two types of analytics aren't necessarily well defined within an organisation. And I think the final thing I can add there from analytics is that you as a marketer really need to be reactive. You need to have the ability to set up these goals. You need to have the ability to set up these actions and the page events and stuff yourself. Not always having to rely on a developer or a schedule or a release cycle. And having that flexibility with analytics really means that instantly actionable becomes minutes, not days.
I think Bob may have wanted to come in there. I know Peter does as well. Bob, can we go first for you?
Can I ask a couple questions? How many of you guys have built personas for your buyers or your website visitors? Okay, a couple. Good. That's and it's very critical to personas. Excuse me. How many of you have also maybe targeted some content against one of those personas on your website? Anybody? Good. So very critical building blocks, right? So you have to be able to segment your audience down into some discernible size, right? So maybe, and maybe you blast out some of the typical personas, right? So maybe it's not just executive, or maybe it's not just, I sell to marketing or I sell to IT, so we obviously have those personas. Maybe you're a B2C and your personas are, I think this person's on the train and I think that they have a median income of, 65,000 pounds, right? So, really get down to the level of understanding of the customer, build up the personas and use them to try to figure out what content to serve based on what you know about the web visitor, right? So you know that they're on mobile device. You might even know what location they're in if they're sharing that through their browser, and you're able to serve up the best user experience. What Conrad was saying is definitely key here. I mean, you have to test, you have to look at the data, and you have to be able to react to that. So use the data, understand what you're testing, and then continue to improve your website. And I just think one more point that's really critical here, especially about getting ready for mobile, is chunk everything up into the smallest pieces that you can. Right. So when we run tests on Ectron.com, one of the things that we do is we break it down into the smallest calls to action that we can, because let's just face it, the guys on my team really, they can't run these large multivariate, changing 15 variables at a time tests. They think in terms of, right, I'm going to try a different header, I'm going to try a different title, or I'm going to try a different picture on the page. Get good at that. It's sort of like working out, right? If I want to be able to lift 400 pounds, I have to start with 100 pounds and then go up to 150 and then 200. The marketing business world's no different. You have to start small, get good at it, expand, get good at that, expand, get even better.
Okay. Peter, I think you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think coming from a content management world, I think when working with content, it's always been, okay, now I'm creating a new landing page, now maybe creating a few information pages, I'm creating a download form and so on. But when you're working with content, you also need to work with goals at the same time. So whenever you create some content, you will need to set up a goal for that content. Whenever you do that, connecting content with a goal, you will be able to measure it. And that's when we can start doing the different tests to start analyzing, are we actually increasing the conversion? So when you're working with content, make sure that you have a clear goal for that, and whenever you have that connection, you can start bringing in analytics and start making real progress on your site.
And sorry, Conrad wanted to add some further point.
Yeah, I think the guys have all made good points. Really, when you think about the way that this dovetails with analytics, really it's developed over time, in that there are really three purposes for analytics. The first was justification. Why do we have this channel? Can we prove that it's actually worthwhile to have a website? Hopefully most people are past that point. But in the early days, that was what it was all about. The second stage, it's still valid because you're still measuring against campaign activity, etc. The second was around learning, and that's really key here, and particularly with regard to what Joel said, you don't necessarily know what your audience want to do. Lots of site owners are very rigid in their thought about how people should use the site that they have. Regardless of platform, regardless of device, we expect people to use it in a certain way. That's the wrong way to think about your digital properties. You want people to be able to achieve their objectives, and your job really is to enable them. So it's about learning, it's about taking as much data as you can and learning from it. And the third, which is really what the guys have been talking about as well, is improvement through testing, through changes that you make. Until you get to that improvement stage, you can't really get value for your investment, because that's when you can actually improve things. You can actually start to increase the ROI, increase sales, increase traffic, whatever it may be that you're actually focusing on trying to do.
I think Anthony had one more point on this, and we're going to move on and look at it.
Can I just ask a question? Hands up, how many brands here are e-commerce focused? Okay, so what's that, sort of 20% or so?
Maybe a little bit more,
maybe
yeah.
more, 20-30%, okay. So I think when it comes to these goals and the tracking ability, we need to understand some idea of performance metrics. So what we need to look at is to say, well, with e-commerce, we take the amount of money sold at the point of sale, we perhaps divide it by the number of visitors, and we can then do campaign and traffic source attribution to get a cost pound index to say this much money was generated from this channel, this page, this visitor, this particular campaign. But with non-e-commerce, and e-commerce to some respect, we have all these little micro-interactions that happen throughout the attract and nurture stages in our buying cycles that are worth something to the business. So what we need to say is, well, if somebody downloads a brochure or watches a video halfway through, or registers or signs up or adds something to the basket, any of these little micro-actions that are goals, can we assign some kind of value to them? So without getting into the depths of site called product knowledge, what we should look at is perhaps a points-based system, or some kind of system that applies what we would say is value, to say, 5 points for this, 20 points for that, 50 points for that. Once we then start to get some kind of aggregate scoring, we can then say, well, you know what, this particular channel is generating this much value per visit, this campaign is doing some type of value. So it's not just ticking off a goal, and what that means is that when we come into all these tools that we all talk about, such as the personalization and the split testing, we can say, you know what, just because 100 people clicked on the blue one and 50 people clicked on the red item, doesn't mean that the blue one was the winner. Who knows whether 100 people who clicked on blue went off and did nothing and left the site, but those 50 people who converted on the red item went off and did something really rich and really valuable. So I think when you're looking at those goals, you need to have some kind of KPI metric, and I think the value concept really does work for a lot of people.
I I think it's a very interesting discussion. I think the e-commerce piece it's a great thing to bring in there, and also I like Conrad's point about testing and understanding exactly what's working and what's not. I think it throws up a lot of challenges for marketers as far as I understand it, because it's a slightly different set of skills and attributes that we're being asked to develop and deliver here. And it seems like the ability for marketers to A, create content in the first place, and B, go through this process of rationalizing it, optimizing it, building on the strengths and bits that work and bits that don't work. That's a whole different set of skills. When you're nodding along, Anthony. This is something that you have to help your clients through, presumably, and marketers need to actually kind of think differently and act differently in terms of what they do and how they do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is something that is new to marketers, this whole idea of kind of marketing technologist type role that we see coming along. And it really does require an understanding in terms of our clients' adoption. Obviously we provide a lot of training and all the help that we would usually do, but we do find that marketers are needing to adjust to this way of thinking. I couldn't agree more, really. They are having to adjust.
And Bob wanted to say something there.
So how many of you guys already have marketing automation platform like a Marketo or Eloqua, HubSpot, Neolane, Primo? All right. So, how many of you guys think in terms of campaigns? Anybody not? Right. So one of the things that marketers, I think, already innately do is think in terms of, think beyond the website visitor, right? Think in terms of the actual campaigns that we're running, the outcomes that we want to have happen from these campaigns. And our website is one of our digital channels, right? So we have email, we have web, we have social channels, and then we have other customer experience channels like call centers, stores, e-commerce. And so, what you really have to look at is how your customers are interacting across all of those channels. And I think we're at the point where, and I'll throw analytics in here with Conrad, but we're at the point where, a website that isn't connecting into one of these great marketing automation platforms, it's like having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the jelly, right? I mean, you really have to connect these systems together. You have to be able to derive value from them, and let's face it, you really want to use the best systems that are available to you at the time so that you can have the best outcomes.
Okay, we've got a couple more points I wanted to cover on my list, because as predicted we've gone slightly off-piste and kind of wandered around a bit on the subject area, which is great. But one of the subjects that's already come through, I think it might have been Anthony that mentioned it, was the kind of notion. I posed the notion first of all about going mobile first, but actually, and I think all of you all touched on it. Actually, you need to be where your customers want to be, and they might be that they want to be on their desktop, they might be they want to be on their tablet. Can content management actually enable you to be offer a completely common experience to your customers, no matter where they decide to interact with you, and then also, back to Anthony's point, actually provide clarity on that to the back end? First of all, Conrad wanted to say something.
As a non-content management vendor, I'll dive in first just to say that it's a good question, but it's not necessarily the right approach, in that consistency of message is one thing, consistency of experience is not necessarily the same, and that if I'm on a smartphone, I don't want the same experience as if I'm on my desktop. So I want a tailored experience based on the platform that I'm on, right. And taking into account things like screen size and bandwidth and all the other factors that might be important for me. And that's the aspect of it which is most important for the brand owner to consider, is if we have to boil this down to something which retains its usability and still has the brand message, how do we do that? What's the content that's important for us, and what are the activities? So,
are you saying they don't want to read my 3,000 word editor's note on their mobile?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
They're never going to get to page 10.
Peter, do you have any thoughts on this? I know that this is an area we talked about as well, on the kind of the functionality and the ability to offer a common experience.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the response design, I love response design, but the criticism for response design is that it's optimizing the experience for the device or for the screen size, and not for the customer or for the end user. But when working with content, I just think it's more important that a specific piece of content, when displayed, it may be on a phone, it may be on a desktop and so on, that it utilizes the functionality or the context that content will be placed in. So when creating that content, you need to make sure that if I have specific things in the context, it may be the position, it may be access to camera, it may be other things, that content should be able to use that. So that's the important part. So when you design the content, you take care of the different context parameters that you have access to in your tool, which may be the position and so on. And if you have the position on the mobile phone, it will optimize the experience based on that. And if you're on a desktop computer and don't have that position, you can't do nothing about it, but you would at least have a good enough experience.
We're kind of drawing to a close in this session. Have anyone got any questions? Now would be a good time to raise your hand, or now in the next 5 minutes, raise your hand. We'd love to get your thoughts or questions or ideas about what you'd like to know about. Otherwise, I'm sure the chaps would be quite delighted to carry on talking for the rest of the time available. I think one of the areas we haven't really covered so far is that we wanted to talk about, which has been touched on, is the kind of integration of data and analytics and the kind of personalisation of content. So again, this is a theme that's coming up. You want to, again, back to Conrad's point, you really want to be delivering exactly what the person wants when they come to your site. But that sounds like, to me, as a publisher, that sounds like quite a kind of a holy grail almost. But is technology increasingly allowing that? Is that what we're saying now?
Yeah, certainly in terms of the analytics data that's available, we're getting a lot closer. So without doing the sales pitch, we've recently released a real-time data stream, which is precisely that. It gives you the ability to utilize data. It's in the early days we called it the fire hose, because basically it's an API. There's no interface to it. There isn't really a front end. It's just the data. As far as web trends are concerned, how you use that data is where you get the value, and that's entirely up to you. But it gives you that ability to respond to things in visit, respond to how somebody's behaving, and to also bring in other analytical data that you may have from the back end, from other systems that you've built up over time, so you can combine those things together so that you can ultimately then choose how you respond to that for each individual visitor.
Okay. Bob, did you have any thoughts on that?
So one of the resources that I really like, there's a gentleman, Scott Brinker, who writes a blog called Chief Marketech. It's definitely worth reading, but one of the things that he's put together is an infographic that shows, it's an attempt, I'm sure he's not capturing everything, but shows the vastness of the marketing technologies that are available to us, right? And this thing literally has all of us up here, it has most of the companies that are in here, and then probably another 5x on this infographic. So really what I just want to illustrate here is that the amount of data is vast, right? It's being stored in multiple systems. Sometimes it's in your CMS. Sometimes you're storing it in your web analytics package. But the amount of information is vast. And what we have to be able to figure out is how to integrate that information in a way that becomes actionable, right? So information by itself is not valuable. Information that we can act on becomes valuable. And so, just one of the approaches that we've taken is to create essentially an information hub. Right, so think about this as a way of connecting your information together with context, right? Because context gives me the ability to create action, and so but just think about this as you start to add new marketing systems into your mix, as you start to buy new social marketing tools, as you start to buy new e-commerce tools. Really think about how that information is going to work and flow back into everything else that you have, and how you're going to act on that information. It's very critical.
Okay, so we have a question at the front, which is fantastic. But in a moment, I'm going to ask the panel just to warn them when we wrap up. That what I want you to do is to give the audience kind of what one key takeaway would you say to people in terms of your in terms of what they should think about when they leave this panel today. So we had a question here in the meantime at the front. Perhaps you could ask that question.
Yes,
sir.
We often send newsletters out to about 15,000 people or so. This might be a bit naive on my part, but is there a way of saying if they're looking at the newsletter on a mobile, on a tablet, or on what device they're looking at it on?
Yeah, so it kind of depends how that content goes out. Email is kind of a little bit different in terms of how you can track it, but as much as possible, if you're driving people back to a digital platform, website, whatever it might be, then absolutely. And the more data that you can get, obviously, is the more useful it can be.
get a sample.
Yeah, not necessarily. It depends how that data's gone out, basically.
Do we have time? Do we have time for one more question? Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask this august panel we have assembled for us today? Okay, I think that's. I think you've blinded them with science, guys. So I think we're just about out of time now. But what I'd like to perhaps ask the panel to do, as I said just now, is I'd like us to think about if there's one point you'd like to leave people with, one salient message you'd like them to leave with in terms of planning the future of their content, the future of their integration of content analytics, and perhaps their mobile strategy, because it sounds like that's an area people are going to be looking at in the future. And Conrad's looking at me, so I'm going to let him go first.
Yeah, it's easy. You've got loads of data. You've got access to massive amounts of data. Use it. Make use of it. Make sure you put resources in, people and time to make use of the data, because there's loads of value in there. The problem is you don't know where the value is until you look for it.
Okay. Bob?
Just have a data-driven, customer-oriented strategy when it comes to your web properties, your digital properties.
Anthony?
I'm going to go with a slightly different message. It talks about our last subject, which is really there is masses of data. Data is very, very insightful. It's very useful, and you should put as much resources and time and effort that you can afford to utilize it. But start small. Look at technologies that require the least amount of integration with other products. Use technologies that work for you as marketing teams that don't depend on developers. But start small and grow, and then you will become a digitally mature brand.
And finally, Peter?
Yeah, and I think just listening to this debate today has been quite apparent for you. There's lots of things to consider. So I think the greatest challenge for us will be to make it easy for the users who actually will need to look at all this data, etc. So for me, I really hope moving forward that user experience for the actual editors and marketers moving forward will be the most important thing, and the things that we discuss here next year.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Hope you join me giving a warm hand to the panel.